Kara Swisher is one of the most powerful tech journalists in the United States. She is an opinion writer for the New York Times. She hosts two wonderful podcasts, Sway and Pivot. I highly can recommend them at this point. And after all, she's a mother of three. Kara, thank you so much for making time again for Deutsche Welle.
Fantastic. Hi, Ines. How you doing?
Good, great seeing you, Kara. So tell me, what is so spectacular about the information Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower has been leaking?
Well, one of the things is a lot of people have been talking about these issues around Facebook for a long time, right? These issues around teens, around misinformation, around sort of worldwide, this has been an issue. But she's bringing documents, internal documents, where Facebook executives are looking at to make determinations. And she also brought a point of view saying that lots of people in Facebook look at these internal documents and are very worried and want Facebook executives to do something different than the choices they're making. So I think one of the things that's interesting is that it's just the tip of the iceberg of information from inside this company that needs to come out, so we understand how Facebook works and what impact it has. And there's no better information than the information from internally that they're measuring themselves. And so that was great. The other thing is she's incredibly articulate in talking about things that we all have talked about. I have talked about this for years, written about it for years. But when someone's an insider, they bring the receipts and they actually explain it to the general public in a smart way. I think it has an impact on how people feel about Facebook, and especially the legislators who are listening. And you saw they were paying rapt attention to it.
So, Kara, maybe we can break it up a little bit. So one thing she's talking about really about the harm caused by Instagram, specifically for teens. And when I understand it right, it's basically all coming down to algorithms. Maybe you can explain a little bit how that works and why that is so dangerous.
Well, one of the things is, look, no matter how you have it, if you knew about phone calls that teens are making, a lot of stuff was people didn't see. They didn't know the parties they weren't invited to. They didn't know the friendships they weren't part of. And they also didn't get constant pictures of people who are prettier and slimmer and living better lives than them. And so no matter how you slice it, this particular medium is a lot about FOMO, which is, wish I was there, I'm not. And it makes you feel bad about yourself. And so it eats at your self-esteem. This has been happening in the past. This is just turbocharged and amplified. And so one of the things it does, and I think Senator Blumenthal showed this, is they created a fake account. And the minute of a teen who said they had eating disorder, and the minute the teen this was up, they started getting really negative stuff around food and around body image and things like that. And so it wasn't helping this fake person, this fake teen girl. It was hurting her. So if you get an inundation of information that's not good for you, eventually it eats at your self-esteem. And this is what some of the statistics shows, but also some of the statistics show that people do well, have good well-being on it. And so great, let's have all the information and then let's have real researchers look at it and then we can talk about it. And that's the one thing. Facebook is making all the decisions itself. And honestly, they're not the people that should be making these decisions, or at least determining what their data, which they took from us, is saying about us. We should have independent people evaluating it and then helping Facebook do a better job at its service.
How could this be done? What should be done?
Well, hold on a second. Sorry. They would need to pass a law, I think, requiring Facebook to share research. It's been a real rocky road for researchers, and a number of them have spoken out this past week about the lack of insight into what's happening inside of Facebook. Now, Facebook has done a lot of research. Let's be clear. Most companies don't do this much research, and they should be given kudos, I guess, for that. But what they do with the research is equally important. And so one of the things that a lot of independent researchers who are very qualified want to do is have more access to Facebook data, obviously anonymized. But Facebook has been pushing back, saying because of Cambridge Analytica, they're not allowed to, they're not legally. So let's make it legal for Facebook to be able to do this, to be able to give this information to qualified researchers and have the federal government run this program, like not interfere with the content, because that's not allowed here in this country and shouldn't be, but actually help facilitate the information coming out of Facebook and going to researchers who can then talk back to Facebook about what they find. I think that would be, the Congress could do that and make it so Facebook doesn't have an excuse not to give it.
But given the first reactions of Mark Zuckerberg, it doesn't look like that this might happen soon, does it?
Yeah, no, he was doing, usually he's on an apology tour because it's usually a disastrous thing that's happened, whether it's January 6th or, attacks in Myanmar. He really can't say anything but sorry. But in this case, they've decided, I use the word brazen to be very aggressive. If you saw their PR people, I thought they did themselves a disservice, and that's me being nice. They attacked her, as someone who wasn't in the room. One thing I say is, if you work for a sausage factory, you don't have to be in the C-suite to understand that sausage is terrible or what's in the sausage. Everybody within an organization has some sense of what's happening there. And these researchers, I think Facebook has treated its own researchers badly by sort of throwing them under the bus. They can try it, but boy, when you have a bunch of people internally who are civic minded and want to make a great product, I think that's the stupidest thing you could ever do, angering people who are just trying to do the best products possible and the most safe products. It just sets off a firestorm internally.
But Kara, I mean, all these law which might help forcing Facebook to do what you're asking for,
One thing.
they obviously were written long before social media existed. So what can be done that this is changed? And maybe you can talk also a little bit about how Europe could help in that regard, or what the United States could learn from the European Union.
I just talked to Marguerite Vestager, and we talked a lot about that. There's a bunch of things she's working on. Obviously, there's some lawsuits, there's some fines, there's some laws they're trying to pass. Europe has always been ahead on this stuff. Now, we talked about GDPR because it hasn't quite worked the way they've wanted, because the big companies have the lawyers and the ability to meet the needs of European regulators, and small companies don't. There's a couple things. And what's really hard is to put it into one basket. There is no one basket. You could do a transparency thing around research. You could do a stronger data privacy laws here in this country. We could have just a national privacy bill. We could have an anti-hacking bill, like to be able to inform people when they've been hacked. You could do antitrust action around mergers and acquisitions. You could do fines. You could give the FTC and other agencies charged with monitoring these companies and regulating them more money and more staff. There's all kinds of bills like this going on, and each of them addresses a different problem. There's no fix-it solution for any of them, because all of the companies are also different. And you see with Apple, they had a lawsuit. There's some question of whether there should be some regulatory approach to app stores that Google and Apple control pretty much. Apple is taking its own initiative by doing some things too. So if you put enough pressure on these companies, they will start to put practices in place. And the last thing is liability. Well, two things: taxing them a bit more for the data they collect, taxing data. And then lastly, liability. They don't have any liability because of Section 230, as is well known. So is there some way to give people an ability to sue these companies that doesn't completely wreck their businesses, right? So everyone else can be sued. You can be, excuse me, you can be sued, I can be sued. A financial firm can be sued. Doctors can be sued. Facebook can't be sued. So for the most part. And so why not give them some liability? And Alex Jones just lost a lawsuit because of things he said on Facebook. Why can't those parents sue Facebook? If they don't win, they don't win. But the ability to put pressure on from a legal point of view is a strong one. And then lastly, changing our antitrust laws. Sorry. Lastly, changing our antitrust laws here in this country. They're antiquated and they need to be modernized for the modern age. And so that's one thing that needs to happen, because no matter what, if the Justice Department or the FTC bring cases, they're dealing with old antitrust laws, and judges, mostly conservative here in this country now, are knocking them down. And the judges are correct, because that's what the law says. And so they can't go beyond what the law says. And so changing what antitrust is has to be done by Congress.
But exactly, Congress, and given the really divided political landscape, how likely is it that anything will happen with these two parties who rather fight each other than fighting for a good cause?
Well, they do agree on this. I'll tell you that. It was interesting to watch Marsha Blackburn and Senator Richard Blumenthal together. You never see them agree on anything. And by the way, they do agree backroom, right? They do on some things. Like Senator Charles Grassley and Senator Klobuchar have agreed on a lot of things. David Cicilline in the House, who did an amazing report, and Ken Buck, very smart. Now, they have some differences around conservative bias, et cetera, but I think most legislators are on board with this idea that tech needs some sort of regulation, and we have to sort it out. One thing that I think will not pass and should not pass is there's an idea to create a new department that covers of data. It's been thought about in the past in the United States. It is really problematic to have the government have any role in content moderation. In this country, we have the First Amendment, we've got all kinds of things. We should really think hard about something like that. That could be, it's not like we haven't had problems with authoritarians in this country recently. So we do not want a Ministry of Information. We do not want that, but we'll see if that's not going to pass, but something like that is problematic.
That resonates very well with our German audience, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we experienced in both parts of Germany, right? In the before they had the GDR and in the GDR. So
yeah, Canada is passing some very strict laws that make me nervous, I have to say. The government should not be involved in content moderation ever.
Kara, you just mentioned January 6th, the storming of the Capitol would probably not have happened without social media. So my question is, how urgent is that something might change within the United States before the next elections? And I'm not talking about the presidential elections in 3 years. I'm talking about the midterms. They will happen in 8th of November in 1 year, so a little bit more than a year.
Yeah. I think we're worried about violence here, and violence stoked by social media. Listen, let me just put this to clear. One of the things that Facebook was using to defend itself was, we didn't start the fire, we didn't start hate. Well, we don't think you did. Like, come on, this is human beings. President Trump is much more culpable, and by the way, right at the top of the list. So are the people who rioted. Like, they shouldn't have entered the Capitol, et cetera, et cetera. You can go down the line of people who are culpable of Fox News, et cetera, et cetera. But social media amplified and weaponized a lot of this stuff. It didn't make them attack, but it didn't help the matter. And in fact, it accelerated it. And so what do we do about that? What precisely do we do? Because you do have a fine line of people being able to say what they want and have divergent opinions and stuff that's just blatantly false and defamatory. Again, why liability is a really important thing. And so that's where I would say, there's so many examples of Facebook not having enough staff in other countries, where there was in Myanmar, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of reporting on this. And I think what's important is to really give them, don't blame them for everything, but give them the blame they deserve. And that's really, they're doing a very tricky thing by saying, I'm almost like, they're almost saying like, we didn't start the Civil War. I'm like, part 2. And I'm like, no, but you're not helping it, right? You're definitely part of the problem and not part of the solution.
When we talk about Facebook this week, we also have to talk about the shutdown. Unprecedented 6 hours, even more, maybe worldwide shutdown of the Zuckerberg empire. What should we take from that?
Well, that these things happen, right? Technology is not, by the way, one of the things that's really remarkable is that the internet worked really well during the pandemic. Boy, did we need it, and boy, didn't it shut down. So that was a good thing, even though we've had massive hacking, et cetera. That's a whole nother sidelight we need to focus on very heavily. But this is an important service across the globe. People couldn't do their business, couldn't share things with their families. This company has enormous breadth and power over citizens across the globe. If that doesn't make you wonder, you're not asking yourself the right questions. Why does one person, Mark Zuckerberg, have so much unlimited power across the globe on how we think, how we speak, how we communicate, etc.? I think as I have said, I don't think he's an evil person. I think he's a very nice guy, but I wouldn't put him in charge of all this. And therefore, we should take the burden off his very, very thin shoulders.
Do you think we will get more information? Will there more be leaked?
Yes. I think it reminds me a little bit. And by the way, I'm not comparing Mark Zuckerberg to Travis Kalanick, who I think behaved much worse than he did. But when Susan Fowler wrote that essay that got so much attention, that started off a big change at Uber. Now, again, Uber's not perfect, but that guy got fired. He got moved along. I think the stuff starts to leak out when one person has the guts to do it. And I think Frances Haugen had the guts to do it and articulate it very beautifully. We'll see if there's more, but suddenly it's when it wasn't possible before, and then you see someone do it and you go, huh. And she did it with a lot of dignity and grace. you start to think about your own life. And I think a lot of people within these companies are sort of like, do I want to be part of this? Just like cigarette manufacturers, you had Jeffrey Wiggin, who was a leaker, very important cigarette manufacturing leaker. These eventually the truth will out. Eventually, it takes a while. There's a lot of damage, but eventually that happens.
Kara, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ines.